Oh, goody.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marvel Snap video. So in this one, we are taking a look at tonight's hot location, which is Milano. Milano says turn 5 is the only turn cards can be played here. So this is definitely one where lockdown is your friend. Another one in everyone's favorite collection of restrictive locations. If you're a little tired of these, good news, June, we should be getting less of these going forward. But for now, another one of the restrictive locations that everyone kind of loves to hate. And understandably so. So what do you want to run for this location? Let's take a look at some decks here that will kind of use this negative to its benefit. First up here, we have a Thanos control list with the Guardians of the Galaxy, or at least some of them. I think lane control is a ridiculously powerful and kind of underrated archetype right now, at least relative to its true performance. And it would not surprise me if this deck does really well during this hot location, as we are all about the lane control. We have the premier ways of dealing with lanes in terms of Storm, Spider-Man, Professor X. I'd expect to see a lot of Spider-Man tonight, as basically just slamming your Spider-Man on turn 4 to lock them out of playing into Milano on turn 5 is probably going to win you that lane versus a lot of decks outside of some fringe cases with things like maybe Dr. Doom or Jeff popping up. So I think as long as you have greater than 3 or maybe greater than 5 power, you really have nothing to worry about if you're able to shut down this lane with Spider-Man on turn 4. But this deck, pretty promising. You can probably play it without Thanos. Admittedly, I think Thanos is fun and adds a bit of a thematic flavor, as well as some variants with the stones, which are obviously all very powerful cards. But I'm sure this deck would work well in a similar core without Thanos. This is just the version I prefer. I like the flexibility of the stones. Sometimes being able to cheat out Professor X early is really neat. We just have the Guardians here, kind of as good cards. You could definitely play this deck without the Guardians, but I think they are fun and decent stats for the cost if you can reasonably predict your opponent, and Nebula definitely helps us be able to do that. Angela gets a little bit of a boost here between Jeff and the Move Stone. She can definitely get to higher powers than she's normally able to obtain, and Juggernaut kind of helps us out with pushing opponents out of our Storm lane, which is always convenient. Enchantress to deal with some of the powerful ongoing effects going around, and Gamora acts as a nice endgame threat that can be big power for not crazy cost, and we have enough mana to weave in a Rocket Raccoon or a Thanos Stone for a little bit of bonus power. Next deck we have here is going to be Sandman Ramp. This is a deck that definitely benefited from the change going on today. So we have Wave no longer impacting cards the same way she used to in terms of a cost reduction. So playing Wave on turn 5 is effectively going to be doing the same thing as Sandmanning people on turn 5, because there's going to be no way to get your She-Hulk or your Death or whatever other card, even Stature, under this effect. Everything costs 4, no exceptions. So Wave is not only going to be a good early game ramp tool, but she's going to act as a pseudo Sandman if we don't end up drawing him on time by turn 5. So that's actually probably a pretty big buff for this deck. So we are a little heavy on the 6-drops here. We are running Dr. Doom, Magneto, Chavez for consistency, and Odin to rebuy some of our powerful on-reveal effects such as Arrow. We have Sandman here to lock the opponent down outside of Wave. We have Jubilee for the high roll with Odin. Just a good kind of pseudo ramp card in general. Helps us get a big thing out if we don't draw our other ramp pieces, which is nice. Early game, we're running Sunspot and Iceman as our 1-drops. You could also consider Nebula here. It really comes down to preference, but I think Iceman also does a good job since opponents can kind of play around Nebula a bit more easily than they can a Iceman cost reduction, or cost increase rather. And then Jeff, you definitely don't need Jeff for this deck. You put in another good 5 cost card to ramp into, but if you have him, the flexibility of Jeff is definitely very appreciated in this style of deck, especially with all the restrictive locations. Being able to get Jeff into a location and then maybe close it out with Dr. Doom, usually a pretty strong thing for this deck to be doing. Another good deck that I think is going to be a option for this location is going to be the Discard deck that we've went over before. Discard, very well positioned right now, can put up a fight against a lot of the top meta decks. And the thing about discard is that it can put a lot of power into 2 lanes, so I think this one can get around Milano pretty easily, because not only can we shut down a lane with Storm, so we really only have to focus on 1 lane, but we just put out a whole ton of power, and if the opponent wants to go for Milano, great. The way our curve works out is we're usually wanting to play MODOK on turn 5. If we're not playing MODOK on turn 5, the deck is generally doing weaker stuff, though sometimes you could probably argue making a Dracula play in that lane might be enough to get the job done. But overall, I think the discard deck is pretty good for this style of location, because you can either lock 1 lane down, or even if you don't have the option of locking a lane, just the fact that the opponent's going to waste some resources playing into Milano when this deck really doesn't have any need or intention to do so probably gives it a bit of an edge for this hot location. Just puts out a ton of power in ways that are typically hard for the opponent to interact with things like Shang-Chi. So for that reason, discard seems like a very solid choice for Milano. Another cool choice we could bring to this location is the Kitty deck, Kitty Bounce. So everyone got Kitty for free today with the patch, as she's been rebalanced and reintroduced due to some bugs that were breaking the game, but now everyone has a Kitty, and if you're wondering how to use her, this might not be a bad choice for the location. The idea with this deck is we are basically just bouncing our stuff a whole ton, then we're trying to play a lot of cards on the final turn to potentially juice our Hitmonkey or our Angela, and sometimes swing a lane with the surprise Shang-Chi, which a lot of people don't expect. A lot of Darkhawks going around in this spot. Definitely something you can consider if you like that kind of addition to the deck. I think it's solid, powerful, but definitely don't mind playing the deck without it. And I know many folks aren't having access to Darkhawk, especially with him not rotating today as planned. So if you want to play a version of Kitty that doesn't really need Darkhawk, I think this is a pretty solid way to go. Bass doing a lot of work here, buffing up a lot of our cheap stuff. Beast, absolutely crazy, getting a lot of our 1-cost cards to cost 0 and our 2-cost cards to cost 1. Obviously, this is all very good with Bishop. We have the Mysterio here, not only for the combo with Bast, where all the Mysterios get 3 power, but also works very well with Hitmonkey. This deck just kind of functions like a well-oiled machine, and it's fairly budget-friendly too, as I believe all the cards outside of Hitmonkey, being a recent Season Pass card, are Series 3 or below. I guess you could say Kitty Pride's a little bit more, but if you had an account today when you booted up Marvel Snap, you got her for free, so not much to worry about there. But if you're looking for something a little bit different and to try Kitty Pride out, I think this one should do pretty well with this location, as you don't really have to worry about that lane that's only going to be active on turn 5. And if you want, you might be able to just kind of go ham with a few cards, like a boosted up and cost reduced Angela, as well as some 1-drops or the Hitmonkey or even the Mysterio, to just kind of close out that lane so you only have to focus on 1 lane on the final turn. Another deck that is probably going to be a solid choice here is going to be Patriot. So Patriot, very good at getting into lanes that otherwise it doesn't have access to, with things like Ultron. You could also try Doom in a list like this, though I think if you're running Doom, you might be more keen on the Iron Lad list. Very similar to how this list goes, however you do put Iron Lad in essentially the Cyclops spot, and you do try and find room for Iron Man sometimes. Not all of them are running Super Skrull, but if Patriot becomes a mainstay meta player, maybe this will come back, and they're running Doom over Ultron. But if you don't have access to Lad, I think this is probably the best way to go for Patriot. Gets in that closed down lane with the Ultron drones a lot of the time, and as a pretty solid backup plan when we do not end up getting Ultron with our Onslaught. So overall, Patriot, pretty solid choice for this one. I think it is at least a tier 2 deck, and the options here are pretty decent. It's possible you might want to go down on the copy effects, since we're going to be dealing with a bit more limited lanes. You could favor something like Cosmo in terms of protection, in terms of a replacement, but that's going to come down to kind of preference for this style of build. But if you are only having access to 1 lane, might not be as valuable to be filling up that lane quickly. So something worth considering when you're trying out a Patriot list for this location, but I do think it's a pretty solid choice, And you can't really go wrong with this style of Patriot that is very good at just putting out a lot of power, and because of Super Scroll is also good with opponents who are also playing Patriot, because we can just kind of steal all those beneficial ongoing buffs right from them. And the last deck we're taking a look at here is going to be the Moon Girl Devil Dino deck, the absolute classic here. And this deck definitely seems like it will work pretty well for this location. The version we're running here, not only do we have Doom as a top end to get into that location, but the nice thing about this one is that we can just slam our big Devil Dino there on turn 5, and there's nothing the opponent can do about it unless we have priority and they Shang-Chi on that turn. They're not going to be able to Shang-Chi this card on the final turn, so Devil Dino going to outpower a whole lot of other cards that are going to be popping up on turn 5 in Milano. We're also running Storm, so we can cut down an additional lane, make things even more awkward for the opponent, which is always nice, and Jeff as a little bit of a bonus way to get into these restrictive lanes that we might not otherwise have access to. Nebula, obviously very good with restricting lane stuff. Angela gets a nice boost with Jeff, but is still just kind of an underrated card. Collector has gotten a lot better since they upped his power, especially when we're running both Agent Coulson and Moon Girl to boost him up. Dr. Doom continues to give that nice wide spread of power on the final turn, which is always appreciated. And She-Hulk is another direction we can go in if we so choose. Sometimes we could even opt to skip turn 5 to go into a She-Hulk Dino turn. I do think if you have the chance to get the Dino down turn 5, that's probably going to be a really good play, and almost certainly the best play if the opponent ends up having priority, so they can't really deal with your thing on that turn. But yeah, Dino seems like a really solid choice for this one, as it's putting out one of the bigger power numbers in the game in a way where your opponent's just not going to be able to react to it on the final turn. But yeah, that is going to wrap it up here for our decks for Milano. Definitely looking forward to seeing less of these restrictive locations in the future. I know it's a design that many people in the community, myself included, think has been rather overdone, and supposedly our feedback has been heard, and we will start seeing a bit more variety of locations starting next month that are hopefully less lockdown oriented. That is going to wrap it up for this video though. If you enjoyed it, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.